On today's juicy episode of the Family Health with Dr. Lex YouTube channel, I'm speaking with Dr. Alexandra Stockwell. Dr. Stockwell is a family medicine trained physician who turned intimacy and relationship coach and expert. Dr. Stockwell specializes in showing couples how to build beautiful, long-lasting, and passionate relationships. She is the best-selling author of Uncompromising Intimacy and the host of the highly acclaimed The Marriage Podcast. Dr. Stockwell graduated from SUNY Stony Brook School of Medicine and trained at University of Massachusetts, Worcester in family medicine. She currently lives in the San Francisco Bay Area and works exclusively on Zoom coaching clients all over the world. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome this goddess, Dr. Alexandra Stockwell, to the show.
Yes. Oh, I went full bombshell, curls, lace, flowers, wine for this guest. I've been so excited to speak with Dr. Alexandra Stockwell, who is a family medicine trained, former family physician turned intimacy educator, expert, best-selling author. And we are here to talk about uncompromising intimacy, how to find, keep, and pursue that fire in your relationship that could potentially be the best aspect of your life. So please welcome Dr. Alexandra Stockwell. I'm so excited you're here.
I'm so excited too. The questions, your focus, I don't know why everyone isn't having this conversation all the time. Because sure, there are a lot of important things, climate change, world peace. And I really honor how important all of those things are, the pandemic. But apart from all of those intensely significant things, these are the most important conversations to be having.
It's true. When it comes down to your individual, your personal satisfaction, your personal happiness, your direction in life, it's so much of it comes down to looking inward, looking at our life immediately around us, how we do things, the way we conduct ourselves. And from my perspective as a fellow family physician, healthy sex life is part of being healthy and whole and human. And it really isn't an open book. It really isn't something that we talk about often. Now, you have been talking about it for decades. And the reason that you and I connect—
Well, let me just say, I was not born that way. I grew up in a home where there were no anatomical names or any other names for my genitals. If I had just gone by the linguistics, I would have thought I was just missing that. And I was so private. I have 4 children. I never discussed sex with my mother until I'd given birth twice. And with my husband, if he said anything, I mean, he wasn't talking about sex, but if he said anything about me or our life together, besides the fact that we were married, he's also a physician, I would get annoyed. That's not to share with anybody else. That just belongs to us. And what do you think you're doing? Airing something that's private. And I totally changed that. And I talk about the extraordinary sex I have. I talk about if I cry during sex. And most of all, I talk about everything that's happening between sex, meaning the rest of our lives and how it relates. And the main reason that I do that, because it did not come naturally, even if now it's super fun. And I'm thinking, why did I have to work to achieve this? But the main reason that I did it is that you'd think I was up late at a party, and I was, which is so funny. But
I love this woman. I love you.
It's just the party was an Orthodox Jewish wedding, but the music was so loud, everything about it took me back many decades. But anyway, we are mammals. Human beings, no matter what else you believe, we are mammals, and mammals learn through imitation. It is the primary mode of learning. And even though we use more sophisticated parts of our brain when we're learning things like calculus, you don't learn calculus by imitation.
Yeah.
All of the more standard and not super high functioning things that we learn it through imitation. And that is most especially true for relationships. And, if you wanted to be well, I was going to say if you want to be a bombshell, but man, you are a bombshell.
Check.
But perhaps Marilyn Monroe inspired you a little bit, you know? If you wanted to be an incredible golf player, maybe you'd look to Tiger Woods to learn some things,
Mhm.
not for his sex life, but for his golfing. Or politician, professor, like all of these different important things that we aspire to.
Yeah.
There is someone worth imitating. And when it comes to having an awesome, fantastic, long lasting, passionate marriage or committed relationship, like whom do we look to?
Yeah.
Like in principle, there probably are some people experiencing that, but mostly we know about the troubles and the dehydrated relationships and the
Mhm.
unspoken resentments. And so now it really is second nature, but I started opening up about my experiences as a way to change that, because when we talk about it, we create much more that we never hear about because the other people aren't talking about it.
Yeah. I love that you use the word intimacy, not just to talk about the physical act of sex and lovemaking or physical connection, but all of the things that you do in between the times that you have sex that make for that fire, that passion, that spark that translates and carries over into the bedroom or wherever you have your sex. But
carries over to the kitchen counter or the backyard
but
patio.
intimacy, the word is so much more than just being physically close. And I love that you highlight that and you utilize that as a part of how you help people reconnect and get to that place. Now, my backstory in growing up is that my mom was rebellious for her time. I think she was very open with sexuality because she had an experience similar to yours. It was very hush hush and nobody really talked about anything. So she kind of swung the other direction and was pretty open in discussing things. And she wanted me to be pretty open in discussing what I was doing and what, and because she was so open, I think that led me to do the opposite of what she did, become very modest and very private and not talk about what I was doing. And so therefore I was exploring and doing things without really the help, the wisdom and guidance of someone who wanted to be a role model for me and who wanted to teach me about healthy sexual relationships. But because she was so open about it, it kind of pushed me a little bit to be a little bit more shy and modest about it. And I still am that way today. I'm trying to find a healthy balance now that I have a teenage daughter. And, we're starting to get into those conversations about what healthy relationships look like, what physical intimacy looks like. So it's just interesting. You're right, how things develop and how your intimacy personality develops. And so I want to talk about that. There's so many things that I want to talk about and so many questions that I have. But I want to go back because you and I connected after I wrote a post about the show Sex Life on Netflix, which is a show, if you haven't seen it, you should. I mean, it's not terribly great, content, but it raises a lot of good questions about marriage and relationships and passion. And ultimately, the question that I asked in the post was, there's this woman who is in a stable, committed relationship with a very loyal, very loving and devoted, successful man who she loves. And that fills her, as she describes it, 85%, fills her up 85%. The stability, the comfort, all that good stuff is there. But the whole show is about how she goes back to the fiery, unrelenting, chemical, physical passion that existed between her and her ex. And her ex was the 15% who that was missing from her marriage. And so the question that I wrote, which was almost like it was directed towards you, but I didn't know you at the time, was do we have to compromise? Do we have to choose one or the other, stability, comfort over fire, passion? Does that, as you advance in your relationship, does that passion, fire have to fade out? Can we find all of those things in one person? And you, the author of Uncompromising Intimacy, I know have the answer. So let's hear it.
Okay, so there's like so many layers to answering this question, but the bottom line is, do we have to compromise? No, absolutely not. And if we're oriented to compromise, we are sure not to have it. But let me step back a little bit and say something about the show, which is that I think the Netflix show Sex/Life does an amazing job presenting the problem.
Mhm.
Like there's something about the first episode or two, or I actually just before we came on rewatched the first 10 minutes, and they do the most incredible job of painting the picture of what that's like to have all the things you thought you wanted: a loyal, loving, attractive husband, beautiful children, the material possessions and the community you
Yeah.
desire. And within that, to slowly, slowly access the courage to admit how unfulfilled you feel. And that within all the connections you thought you wanted, you feel lonely. So I just think the show does a magnificent job painting the dilemma. It like is gonna pull on so many women's heartstrings as we see something real and mostly unspoken just described well. And
Yeah.
there's something actually very like weirdly comforting to watch that and recognize that reality.
Yeah.
However, I think what the show then does with that awareness is mostly kind of crappy. And I'm sympathetic, obviously, because they're creating a show and it's more dynamic and there's the drama, and, you know, that's all fine. But I'm also sympathetic because they don't know what to do after they've described this dilemma, because in our society, we don't know what to do once we've created that situation. So I really, really like the show, not because I think it's an excellent show, but because it is a very accurate rendition of the state of our world, minus the fact that many women haven't had such exotic, perfectly just hitting the spot, varied, intense sex experiences before marriage. Maybe they have, maybe they haven't. And of course, not every woman is going to go looking in the past to access that again. But again, just to summarize what I think of the show is that they present the problem beautifully and they don't know where to go, because as a society, we don't know where to go. But I definitely have the answer. And the reason that I say that is because I know this dilemma, and my parents were divorced. I didn't really know how this works. And there were two contributing factors that bring me to have conviction about how to actually resolve this dilemma. The one is that when I married my husband, things were good. And I simultaneously, in my mind, was appreciating the early years of our marriage, becoming parents. Like, we're both physicians, we're very aligned, like, we're in love, this is fantastic. And then there's this other track in my head that just assumes, of course, we're going to get divorced. Like, taking notes on what a devoted father he is. So I could tell my daughter when we were no longer together what a beautiful family life we'd had, because I just couldn't picture it. So at some point, I realized this is ridiculous, and I'm going to make this come true if I don't figure out how to really attend to this. So that's one piece that really motivated me. And the other piece that motivated me is that my husband and I met the first week of medical school. We went through our training, residency. I had one child in medical school, one just before my internship, and we never had sex. Like, I don't remember the characters in the show right now, but you know,
Cooper and Brad.
Okay, so and what's her name?
Oh, I don't know her name.
Okay, well, that's so funny. Okay, well, it came out I think it came out at
It's
the end
Billy.
of June, and
It's
within a
Billy.
week, I had watched the whole thing. What?
Yeah. Her name is Billy. That's
Billy,
it.
that's
It
right.
came to
Okay,
me.
so
It came to me.
yeah, so I always thought, once my husband and I have time, then we will spend hours enjoying one another's bodies and
Yeah.
not going to clubs, but having our parenthood version of Billy and Brad encounters.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen. And I realized, oh, it hasn't been this way for 10, 12 years. And it's not just because we didn't have time.
Mm.
It's because I don't know how to tap into that. And he doesn't know how to tap into that. I had a lot of thoughts along the way. Why isn't he more skilled? I need to lose weight. What if somebody hears us? Like, I had all these different iterations. In case you're just listening and this isn't edited out, I don't know if it will be. I just needed to drink. But anyway, I just made it my business to figure this out.
Yeah.
Because I just thought, I don't want to get divorced. And I do not want to live another, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 decades with my version of what Billy was facing.
Mm-hmm.
So, should I keep going with what I have discovered? Okay,
Please
yeah.
do.
Okay, so the first thing is that what it takes to have awesome sex in a one-night stand or early in dating has very little to do with what it takes to have awesome sex when you are waking up next to the same person after 5, 15, 35 years. Because you can have awesome sex on a one-night stand without even knowing the person's name.
Mhm.
Like, you do not need to share anything except the heat of the moment, which is actually how Billy and Brad got started, right?
Mhm.
But when you are with someone day in and day out, it is not possible to have passionate, sensual, sexual intimacy without true emotional intimacy. And so I actually think that that is much more of a limiting factor than most people realize,
Mhm.
because getting along, having a nice collaborative companionship kind of relationship, that is not emotional intimacy.
Mhm.
That is what you get when you prioritize compromise. The way to have a great marriage is to learn to compromise. Great.
Yeah.
If you want a bland, neutral, conflict-free relationship, by all means, focus on compromise. But if what you want is passion, then you need to find the way to know who you are enough to reveal who you are and really be curious, be vulnerable, take responsibility for the quality of your interactions, and learn how to create emotional intimacy. And then the most amazing things happen. I learned this in such an interesting way. When I began coaching, I had this one couple who had been married, I think, for 19 years, and they had a child in middle school and a child in high school. And at the time that I met them, they hadn't had sex in 7 months. And they wanted to stay together. They loved one another. Their home was super cute and everything looked great from the outside.
Mhm.
But I knew, okay, like, I can help them have much more fulfilling and more frequent sex, but that's not where I want to start, because they have all this built up disconnection where they discuss logistical things and things related to the children,
Yeah.
but they hadn't really been spending time with one another for
Yeah.
the pleasure of being with one another. So I took the first few sessions to really focus on the rapport with them. And I think maybe the fourth session, when they were laughing and really much more emotionally connected, I thought, okay, now we can get into it. So I said, let's transition what we're talking about. I was super roundabout, very gentle, and they didn't know what I was saying. And then she, who was actually a pediatrician, caught on and she said, oh, we're all set with that. And she just started giggling and kind of leaning into him. And it was a very flirtatious moment between the two of them. And it turned out just learning how to be more emotionally present and emotionally intimate. And it's not just about like neutral meditative presence, but like how to be juicy and self-expressed and emotionally connected, and for her not to feel like she's too much and for him not to feel like he's inadequate, like all of the things that contribute to emotional intimacy, which is a learnable skill. It's not just like you have it or you don't. It can be cultivated. But that just paved the way for all that connection in the bedroom. And I don't have precise statistics, and it's obviously totally anecdotal. There's no case controlled double-blind study to be done. But in my experience, when couples are having difficulty with sexuality, meaning the sex is infrequent and or unfulfilling, that about 80% of the time, when I coach them on emotional intimacy and self-acceptance and acceptance of the other person and all of the ingredients that make it fun and fascinating emotionally, 80% of the time, what's happening when people take their clothes off is really very straightforward. I mean, not straightforward. It doesn't need any more attention from me because it just takes off. It's like the key to unlock the passion. It's rarely in how skillful your lover is. Or if that is where it is, when you have emotional intimacy, a couple can navigate that themselves often.
So when you describe emotional intimacy, I suspect that the course of most relationships is that you start out with some sort of friendship or some sort of fire, passion, whether it's a emotional, physical connection, you start there. And when it's just the two of you in the beginning, it's more self-centered. You're more centered on your relationship, on each other's needs and wants. You have time. There are not other distractions. And then as you go through the phases, you go through the bridal shower and the wedding and the honeymoon, and then you start having kids and career changes and obligations. Your parents start aging, and maybe you're taking care of other people or businesses or whatever the distractions are that slowly over time filter into your home and your relationship, and they take up the space that was previously there for each other. That chemical, physical, and emotional connection can start to become more distant because there's other stuff filling that space. So my husband and I, we met the first day of undergrad, and we're the very best of friends from the very beginning. We always had a very strong emotional connection. And ultimately, when we started dating, we have always had a very strong physical connection as well. And when we were watching the show, when I was watching the show and he's like, what are you watching? And I'm like, I really feel truly like he has always been my Brad and my Cooper, but I don't think that he would be upset with me saying this. As other things have filled our time, the ability to connect emotionally and physically it waxes and wanes, but it does have periods where we are very distant. And we do have to find our way back to that friendship, the emotional connection, having time to talk and listen and look in each other's eyes. And inevitably, when we are distant, our sex life is different. And we notice it, and we have to work to get back towards that. So I know what strategies we use, but I would love to hear from you. What kinds of things do you recommend that people do when these other things, these other distractions, obligations, commitments come into your life and push your favorite person physically, emotionally, when it pushes you apart? What are some of the things that you can do to kind of get back to that emotional intimacy, which then therefore translates into the physical intimacy, the fireworks, all that stuff that was there when we were 20?
Okay, well, I would love to hear what some of your tips are too, but I'll go ahead and answer your question
Okay.
first.
Okay,
Because
cool.
like the thing is that I think every couple develops their own flavors and we all can learn from it.
Yeah.
But I just want to I think you really described that phenomenon so well, but I want to just adjust one little thing
Please.
because the way that you talked about it, it's like things are magnificent, emotionally connected, hot and heavy. And then there are all of these distractions that come and take the attention away from that.
Mhm.
And that can be how it happens. But what is actually more common and more like physiological and psychologically representative is that at the beginning of a relationship, there is all this excitement and also uncertainty. Like, and what I would describe as curiosity, where there just is so much attention on the other person. Like the feeling of being in love is just filled with curiosity. Like, what's his favorite vegetable? And what was his second grade teacher's name? And
Yeah.
where is that scar from? And like, just, you can't get enough. It's so fascinating. And then in the next phase, whether or not distractions play a part in bringing you to this next phase, there is a safety and a comfort and a companionship and a predictability, which truly is wonderful. I am not knocking that at all. It's essential. Like, if you don't ask your husband something because you know what he's going to say anyway, that is a beautiful phase and a very particular, like, affirming way of being connected. But when it comes at the cost of a lack of curiosity, that is when the connection diminishes. So, one of the things that I suggest as a way to get back together is so simple. It costs no money, it costs just a little bit of time. And when you're listening to this, do this tonight. Just cultivate curiosity and ask questions that you haven't asked in a while, and open and really listen to the answers in a new way. And it doesn't, not that it has to be a new way, but I mean, allow yourself to have a new experience. Because if we use you and your husband just as an example, you're both growing, evolving people, you're having different experiences, you're encountering new challenges and new accomplishments. And it's not that people get lazy, it's that so often stable couples really relax into the comfort in a relationship
Mhm.
and need to bring the attention back to being curious. And maybe you don't want to know your husband's second grade teacher's name, but then ask things that you really do care about. They can be questions that are whimsical, spiritual, profound, practical. If you could have dinner with any celebrity or alive or dead, who would it be and what would you ask them? It only makes sense to ask a question that you're actually curious about, but this is like a kind of lube to bring people back together, is just to be allow yourself to be fascinated by who this person is, and whether or not they ask you the questions, reveal yourself as well. It I don't know if it will ever stop amazing me how just becoming more curious makes relationships better. So I'm all for anyone who wants to go on a vacation, weekend getaway or lingerie, or if a sex toy is, what does it, but it's really bringing attention back to looking at this person as someone to discover. And that is the biggest disruptor for things feeling mundane. So that's my first thing. Anything you want to say before I say the next?
I was just going to say, you asked, that you said you were going to ask me.
Yeah.
So whenever we feel, it's our reaction to when we feel that way, when we feel disconnected, is kind of the opposite of what you're saying. And I'd love to know how you feel, because when we feel disconnected, he goes to me, it's because we haven't had sex in a little bit. And so like it or not, time or not, we just like, we will reconnect physically and remind ourselves how good it is and how much we love each other and what great friends we are. And that then kind of helps the emotional connection to return. Is that wrong? I don't know if that's wrong, but that's what.
Okay, first of all, let's be very clear. You're the authority on your own experience. So if that works, of course it works.
Yeah.
And it does work. It's really actually beautiful. And it also speaks to what an emotionally healthy person you are and your husband. And that just isn't true of many couples, because if, let's just talk in terms of heteronormative, if a woman has had any kind of unwanted sexual experiences, been harassed, raped,
Sure.
like anything, forcing herself before she feels her desire doesn't actually accomplish what it does in your marriage.
It's a great point.
What you're describing is so beautiful, but the key to that is that you're participating from your own desire. So he may initiate it and say it the way you just said, but you know how to tap into your own desire and let it take you, rather than participating because it's what he wants, which is
Understood.
the kind of sex so many people are having in the first place. So I don't tend to advocate that on an interview when I don't know who's listening and all of that, but I just expressed why.
Sure.
But for somebody, but I will say that one of the most important things to keeping passion alive is taking responsibility for it and being willing, whether you do it the way I'm going to talk about right now or someone does it in a different way, doesn't matter, but being able to have what I actually call emotional agility, where you can internally pivot. So this comes up when I'm talking with people more often, when somebody wants to enjoy sex more and thinks, oh, if my partner were a better lover, then I would enjoy sex more. And by all means, partners should become better lovers, but that won't actually do anything unless I'm willing to shift inside and be willing to experience more pleasure. Like someone else can't do that for me. And what my particular challenges are, or any listeners, to feeling more pleasure, that's a unique journey. But it actually takes me to the next suggestions I have. And so I love that you shared that. Thank you. So one thing is being curious. Another thing is that when in a long-term relationship, we often don't have time. And so I am all about enjoying the time when you have it, but not needing time to really make the relationship better or more intimate or more gratifying. And instead, using all of the mundane or many, it's not about all, we're not perfectionists here, but using mundane interactions to create add to the erotic connection. So there is a way in which, let's say, this is like super basic. Let's say we're at the dinner table, my husband, my children, and me, and I say, will you give me the salt? Or I turn to my husband and say, would you please pass the salt? And I really love the term I've coined, which is discreet eroticism, because I am flirting and adding erotic energy and receiving erotic energy with my husband way more than anyone else knows. And one of the most remarkable ways to do that is if I'm having a conversation with him on any topic, honestly, if my focus is on the content exclusively, that is not going to be a flirtatious, juicy
Mhm.
interaction. But if I just like bring my attention to my heart, or when I'm feeling like it, I bring my attention to my genitals and make the same communication without saying anything. Nobody else knows. I've done a lot of
Yeah.
experimenting without anybody knowing. But like if I'm inhabiting my juicy sensuality and communicating about carpool where we have dinner or some new business idea or anything else,
Mhm.
that conversation does more for our relationship because I am coming from that place. And I think the highest level of achieving this is what you described. That your husband's like, let's have sex to reconnect, and you're like, okay. But for someone who isn't there yet,
Mhm.
to just enjoy drinking your coffee, like pick your favorite mug, as you pour it, enjoy like the sound and the smell and the shape of the fountain of the liquid. Hold it in a way, like feel the weight of that cup, bring it to your lips, like really pay attention to any of the senses, smell,
Sure.
touch, taste, and so. And so if someone, this is not emotional disconnection, but if someone wants more pleasure in sex, the first place I start is more pleasure. Like, have things, if you work in an office, have art that makes you feel good on the walls.
Yeah.
If you're walking by flowers, literally, I mean, smell them, but honestly, a lot of flowers and vases don't have a strong scent, but
Yeah.
the touch of the petal is so, it's soft and like there's a way to enjoy life more,
Yeah.
which feeds into the bedroom.
Yeah. So heightening your sensory experiences that have nothing to do with intimacy can help you be more in tune with those senses that are.
Yes, although I would say that has to do with the intimacy with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. No, that's beautiful. I think that's really powerful, and empowering is a better word. Because I mean, we're talking about couples and we're talking about people who are trying to create fulfilling, intimate relationships with another person. I mean, we could probably do a whole other show about creating intimacy and generating good feelings individually on your own.
Yes, because if you can't do that with yourself,
Yeah.
there's no other person who's going to provide that for you all the
Mhm.
time. I mean, maybe occasionally, but not really.
Yeah.
Okay, but one more thing.
Yeah,
I know,
please.
were you going to ask something else?
No,
Okay.
it's all yours.
So the other thing that I want to say, and this is one of the things that sex life just completely misses the boat on, is that Billy Brad kind of sex, meaning sex which is intense and like all consuming, like you're in a fire that's the perfect temperature to be simmered and boiled and
Yeah.
just orgasmically satisfied. And novelty, that's an important part of that.
Mhm.
That looks completely different in a long-term relationship
Mhm.
than it does in a new relationship or an illicit relationship, because then there's other like turn on with the doing breaking a taboo.
Sure.
So for me, so I've been married for 25 years, and what does that for me is if, let's say, my husband and I are having sex and he's fully present, I'm fully present, we're experiencing whatever we're experiencing, and we are so like connected that he makes a micro adjustment in his physical position, and suddenly this whole new landscape opens up for me. Or like, I don't know where you want to go with this, but like that's how squirting works. Like there are all of these experiences that it's in the micro adjustments. Once you have that connection, it's discovering, it's like going from the macro to the micro,
Yeah.
that things become fascinating and fulfilling and maybe not so dramatic to somebody else, but in your body, it's like, oh, I never felt that before, even though if there were a researcher measuring, it sure looks like I would have.
So let's go there. The person who is probably listening to this is probably somebody who is in a long-term relationship and has maybe hit a wall, or maybe feels those, kind of waxing and waning levels of connectedness,
Yeah.
and maybe wants to get back to something like the taboo or the illicit, or the Billy and Brad, type of fiery, passionate sex, which you're right, absolutely doesn't have to be every time. Sometimes it is. And sometimes, it is more routine and kind of regular and just plain feels good.
Yes.
So how do you take the person who is kind of self-conscious, maybe stagnant in their relationship, maybe is listening to this without their partner, and their partner doesn't really know that they feel that way? Although I suspect that if one person feels it, maybe the other person does as well.
Maybe not. People
right?
get so, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So how do you take that person who is feeling like they want more, like they want to feel more, like any little bit more, or they even want to just get back into the bedroom? How do you take all of those insecurities about kind of starting over, or maybe just kind of starting to ramp back up to a place where you're free enough to, because you have to be emotionally free to do something kind of what how you describe it, like squirting or, anal or whatever. You have to have a certain level of freedom, fearlessness, connectedness, and comfort.
And I would add detachment from the outcome. Like, if it doesn't work and you just burst out laughing, that's okay.
Right. So how do you get from that person who's listening, who wants to notch it up, who wants to feel, even just get started or notch it up to the next level, or somebody who wants to get to the level where they're wild and hanging from the rafters like Billy and Brad? Where do you start? Where do you begin?
Okay, there are two places. One is what I already said about just allowing yourself to have more fun and more pleasure in your life. That is necessary, and that you need to attend to. And the other is to speak with your partner, and I'm going to give guidance on how to have that conversation. So in every complaint, there is a desire, and that is very important when it comes to this. I do not recommend that anyone listening says, okay, this is what Alex and Alexander, or Lex and Alexander say. I'm going to go tell him this isn't working for me, and we're going to make it better.
That's not what we're saying.
That is not what we're saying. What I am saying is, think of a time when you did have sex and it was wonderful. And if you don't have something that comes to mind, then think of a time when you leaned on his shoulder and watched a movie and it felt really special. Like, have it be whatever it needs to be so it's true. And I recommend saying, honey, I really love being with you. I love our life together. Our children are so amazing. Like, whatever is true, I'm just going to make this up.
Yeah.
Like, our children are so amazing. And I can't believe we actually got this house. You are a good man. And there's no one I'd rather be with than you. And even though I feel like so much of our life is wonderful, there's one area that I would like to put some attention on with you and have it be just as good. And I assume you'll have your partner's attention. And then you can say, remember when we were on vacation in Maui and no one was around and we snuck out to the beach, like, whatever it is. It doesn't need to be this exotic, but
Right.
just like some time that was special.
Yeah.
I want to have more of that again. Do you want to have more of that again? And the answer is going to be yes. And even if you do nothing but have that, I mean, at first, but have that conversation, that will already shift things
Hmm.
because you break through the wall of not talking about it and you both acknowledge and agree on where you want to go. It can make the gap between where you are and where you want to go feel particularly painful. But I'm encouraging you not to focus on that. And instead, like, there is something fantastic about knowing he wants it too,
Mm-hmm.
or she wants it too, whoever it is. Okay, so that's the first step. And it may be that that's all that happens for a week. Or it may be like, okay, how are we gonna, like, let's get started. And then it's really a question of the culture of the marriage. I think one of the easiest access points is role play, because when there's role play, we can free ourselves up to get outside our usual restrictions. So
Yeah.
if you speak English with your spouse and you both know Swedish, try doing this in Swedish. Or if you met in a bar, like, go to a bar and have him pick you up again. Like, it can be something familiar, as those two examples were, or something unfamiliar, like pretend you're Angelina and Brad back in the day. Like, it can be, or characters from a movie you enjoy. It really doesn't matter what it is. And
Yeah.
it's not about the roles. It's about stepping outside of the restrictions of how you usually interact.
Yeah. And in a sense, you kind of can free yourself of insecurities about who you are because you're pretending to be someone else.
Exactly. And that is something that you can take as far as you want.
Yeah.
In getting dressed and, you know, whatever. So that's one way to do it. And another way, like, it's very hard to generalize because it depends
Yeah.
what the sex was that they're going back to.
Sure.
But whatever created that in the past, in terms of what room you were in, what music was playing, see what happens when you bring that back.
It's so funny because in the same, in the same last minute, you brought two memories of mine to mind, and they're very, very different memories, and they speak a lot to the different personalities. So each partner will have different, intimacy languages, if you will.
Yes.
What I want to receive and what I want to give might be very different than what he wants to receive and what he wants to give. And so, I think it's important to take turns being for each other what the other wants, while also honoring what you want, whether it's at the same time or at different times. But when you talked about going back to memories that like made your like just melt into a puddle, and I would do anything for him at that moment. I've always felt that way about him, but there's a moment in particular that I remember. It's clear as day. We were standing on a corner in New York City, and there was a couple on the corner next to us, and the guy like kissed the girl on the cheek, and my husband like scooped me up and like made out with me on the corner and was like, we're going to show that, you know what I mean? Like it was kind of like, that was weeks, buddy. And that moment for me, it was 18 years ago. But it was like, in the TV shows when the camera like goes around and around the couple, and it was like the music starts getting louder. That for me is a memory that's etched. And that kind of behavior from him, he can get me to do anything he wants, anything. For him, so funny that you brought up Swedish, because the memory that he'll talk to you about, as clear as day for him, is when he came home from work one day and I pretended to be a Swedish massage therapist. And that led to some of the most mind-blowing, things we've ever done. And he'll still talk about that to this day. So like you said, it could be very different for each person, what each person needs and how each person can get back to that feeling or kind of start to reconnect with that feeling. And I don't know about other people, but for us, it always goes back to what we have always loved about each other, and because we change. and we grow. And there are certain things that annoy the shit out of him that I do. And there are certain things about him that, that I feel like we don't, like he should or could do better, and like interfere with the way we function as business partners, and ultimately, he's still the same person I fell in love with when I was 20 years old. And I still do all the things for him that made him fall in love with me. And so for us, it's a lot of times it's going back to like those memories and those moments and those things that have worked for us in the past, and try to bring those back into our house again, and back into our relationship, and back into our interactions. I don't know if that's kind of standard advice.
I think it is so beautiful. And when someone is feeling dissatisfied in their relationship, we are wired to focus on that. Like, we're wired to focus on our dissatisfactions and all of that. And it's very easy to forget the fun. Another thing that I often have couples do is just make a list of the things that they enjoy doing together and make a point of doing them. Because when you're having fun, it's simpler to have these conversations. You have more inspiration to do it. Yeah, I really love it. And another thing that you said about people being different and each person getting a turn, this is a more advanced place. So if someone's really stuck and not sure where to start, this isn't a thing to do. But once you've had the conversation, you're having sex and making love and things are better, it's really awesome to have a time where one person is in charge of what's happening. Mm-hmm. And then another time when the other person is, and there is a way that you can get to know your spouse, like in a way that they could never explain to you. Mm-hmm. And if they ask you to do something that you don't, like it never would have occurred to you to do, it's not the thing that turns you on. If it's like, if it doesn't work for you, then don't do it. But if it is something, like, consider it. Are you willing to do it?
Yeah.
Because of how wonderful it will be for him. There is something
right.
empowering and really bonding for that kind of dynamic.
So for people who may not necessarily be comfortable, maybe for example, people who are really detached, who really are missing connection, emotionally, physically, whatever. And you're going to start to say, we're going to start to work on building the emotional connectedness and the intimacy and the play and the flirting and the friendship and the enjoying things together and the, full on sensory body experience of just existing and being alive.
I love how you say that.
What role for people who are uncomfortable with the physical part, or maybe who don't necessarily have that emotional connectedness, to what extent do you suggest using other things like sex toys, like watching, pornographic things or reading erotica? At what point do you think that maybe kind of utilizing I don't want to call it a crutch, because a lot of people don't use it as a crutch. These are valuable tools in a lot of people's sex lives. But at what point do you, kind of give your relationship permission to kind of detach from just depending on each other physically, and maybe utilizing something to help that along? Was that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the most important thing is what the culture of the marriage is. So if you've never used any toys and you just assume we don't do that, but you actually want to, then bring it up, because you don't know. And I am a fan of trying things and seeing what really works for you.
Yeah.
However, this is controversial, but it's still true. If we use toys on a regular basis, depending on what toy it is, it can desensitize us.
Sure.
So if a woman orgasms with a vibrator for years, she truly is desensitized to another person's touch. And so that is not a help, but there's no problem in using something that's going to contribute to the juiciness. The thing I want to say though is that there are generalizations. This is going to be very not PC in terms of the gender stuff, but I really want to convey something that is useful, even if I don't have the most gender inclusive way of expressing it. And that is that the most common assistance for sex that men use is porn. Women, there's a lot of women who watch porn, but far and away, that is something that men use. And the most frequently used assistant for women is vibrators. And that, in my opinion, is because industry is brilliant at tapping into a reality and then twisting it for capitalist reasons. So,
Yeah.
in fact, women are extremely responsive to touch, and what the vibrator is doing is the best way for a woman to get off, not any individual woman necessarily, but in general. And what men really respond to in a way that people don't usually talk about or appreciate, they respond to seeing someone else have pleasure. And porn is the ultimate way to get off on watching someone else have pleasure. Never mind that it's typically inauthentic and fake. It's not actual pleasure, but there's something about that. And so when there's disconnection very often and insecurities, very often women feel like they can't even ask for as much as they want. And what I want to contribute to that conversation is that, yes, ask for what you want so that you can experience so much pleasure, because when a woman is truly having pleasure, they are both going to enjoy it. So if using a vibrator gives her pleasure, don't hide that. Let him see that.
Yeah.
Because it's gratifying for him.
I mean, you're just awesome. I think that the way that you explain things and the way you put things into context, and even your disclaimer that things can't be generalized and really do depend on the individual, the relationship itself, the individuals, the security levels, the self-confidence. I think it's just proof that these conversations can and should happen, and maybe just by hearing us talk to each other about these things, like saying, I want to be pleased, I want to experience pleasure, or I want, you to try this the next time, I think may just open the door or encourage or give people a little bit of confidence to have those conversations, in their own relationships. We were talking about porn for a second, and
one thing about having this conversation,
sure.
I think to a degree that women really don't appreciate, when we speak about this, sometimes we know it and sometimes we don't know it and are still doing it. And basically, like, pointing out our partner's inadequacy. And these conversations need to be had without babying our partners. We need to be frank and honest.
Yeah.
But we also really need to come from the position that they want us to be enjoying ourselves. And the more respectful and the less putting down and the more specific about what we want rather than what isn't working, the better those conversations go. But you were going to bring up something about porn.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that you want to encourage people to just be vulnerable enough and non-judgmental. Like the worst thing I could think of would be like, if I was like, I want to try this. And he was like, oh God, no, or like you said before,
But when that happens, instead of, oh God, no, the response that I recommend is, I am so glad you told me what you want.
Okay.
In that, I am not committing to doing diddly squat, but I am not rejecting him for his desire.
Sure.
we don't choose our desires. We just choose whether we ignore them, go fulfill them somewhere else, resent someone, but like we don't choose our desires. So don't reject your partner for their desires. Just say, thank you for telling me that. I didn't know that's what you wanted. I'm so glad to know.
Yeah.
And it can be a different conversation whether or not you're going to participate in that thing.
Well, just the validation of the desire, kind of, I think if that's treated, if the reaction is negative, it could lead to more insecurity about
more disconnection and more of everything you don't want.
And so, just validating that feeling and the ability to express that desire, like you said, whether you decide to do it or not, is just kind of just opening another level of, or could lead to a different level of self-confidence. And maybe could, lead to the conversation about, okay, hey, you heard me and I really now want to hear you, and what could I do different? What would you like to try? So I think those are all awesome points and very interesting ways to think about how you're communicating, and are you communicating, are you expressing in whatever, languages you use? Are you expressing what it is that you want and need? Do you have the confidence to do that? What I was going to ask about, because before we were talking about, like things like porn, I think that there's like kind of a maybe like women experience in some communities. I'm not going to generalize and say all, but in some places, in some communities, in some families, experience like a purity culture where women are supposed to, save themselves for their husband. Sex is something that women give away and that men take away. The man takes her virginity, and the woman is to give permission for the man to have sex. And it's a very, kind of male dominated relationship. Of course, we're talking about cisgender heteronormative here. But so when women kind of grow up with that mindset, maybe you're saving yourself for this like perfect moment or whatever. And then when you kind of confirm that, the most commonly used kind of assistive or whatever you want to like thing that men use is porn, I think it can kind of lead to unrealistic expectations. Because here are these women who are saying, you're supposed to please your husband, you're supposed to do whatever he wants. And he's, you give away your body to him. And then men are watching porn, which is a lot of times very extreme and maybe kind of shows like this maybe unrealistic or maybe extreme example of what women should be doing or could be doing. And then does that put into a man's mind that this is what sex should look like and this is what I want? And then on the other hand, you have a woman saying like, you just have to do what pleases your man. And his version is what he sees in porn. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does. Okay, this is a fantastic question with many different layers. So the first thing is that for a woman in the situation that you just described, I am so sympathetic to her dilemma, because basically up until marriage, she's not supposed to think about sex.
Yeah.
It's sinful. It's not who she is, unless she's a bad girl, but then that's not the situation we're talking about. Being a good girl means being completely disconnected from any of those desires, urges, and impulses. Then the wedding happens. And as it turns out, it is not some miraculous alchemical transformational event, but she's supposed to, after that, know how to be an expressed woman who can both give and receive pleasure and be like fully present and provide just remarkable experiences. Well, there is no wedding ceremony that creates that transformation. So I will say that education is important, and there are specific sites that both sell sex toys and information. There's a site for very observant Muslim women. There are some sites for Jewish women, and there are definitely evangelical purity-based websites so that the models and the language and all of that is not difficult for a woman in this situation, and she can just get the information.
I love that.
You know, before saying more about what she can do, one thing is, all else being equal, she's likely to become a mother, and she can educate her children so that they don't have to have that experience. You may know that in the Netherlands, sex ed begins in preschool, and it's hard as Americans to picture what that means because they're not getting the sex ed that we get in high school in the United States, which isn't really sex ed. It's like anatomy and physiology, sex, but it's not how to experience pleasure. It's not about consent. It's not about requesting for adjustments. But anyway, in the Netherlands, where sex ed starts just with anatomy in preschool, and then there's some sex ed throughout elementary education, they have this incredible statistic, which is adults were surveyed, and in most countries, adults report the first sexual experience not being enjoyable. Mm-hmm. That's a rare phenomenon. But in the Netherlands, where they have sex ed and they are much more informed, I forget right now the number, but it's like, I don't know, 72% of adults had positive experiences with their first sexual encounter. So there really is power, and I'll say pleasure, in knowledge. So if a woman is in this situation, I think one of the most important things is to find trustworthy resources so that she can make sense of her own experiences and find her and do the work to consider her experience important. Now, I thought with your question, you were saying, what if they both have the paradigm that his pleasure is everything? Where do they go with that, right?
Yeah.
Well, I know that someone who's really trapped in that situation typically goes to the pastor for advice. And what I'm going to say is not what a pastor would say. And I just acknowledge that with real respect for everyone's priorities. But in that situation, I would say, start with yourself. Get a mirror and look at your genitals and use your hand, put some lube on it. You can use any oil that you would eat. You can also have enter your body through the genitals, but and just start exploring. Like, put your hand super, super lightly, barely touching your pubic hair, and just move your hand very slowly and feel how gentle that touches, which is probably completely unfamiliar in the scenario we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Touch your outer labia, touch your inner labia. Just think of someone whom you find super attractive while touching. Put on music while touching. Like, get to know yourself, mm-hmm. because when you do, there's a chance that you can actually, with respect, guide your guy to create experiences that are really beautiful for both of you. Because the fact is, whether it's a really well brought up, pious Christian man who's never had sinful thoughts, we'll say, or it's someone who's watched a lot of porn, in either situation, they don't know. And I want to, unless you teach them, and I want to add the thing that in the short term seems like the most efficient, that will just have long-term consequences that are terrible, is faking orgasm. That's the most efficient way to get out of a sexual experience you don't enjoy, as long as it's not violent, is just to fake an orgasm, so it's over.
Mhm.
The problem with faking orgasm is that you are training your lover to touch you in ways that don't actually make you feel good. It's like
Yeah.
giving the most positive feedback for something that's completely out of tune and sounds terrible. So don't fake it. And when it feels good, make sure to let him know that. It can be with words, but it can also be with how you move your body, or a sound of, anything that's a little better. Give some positive feedback, because we all respond in a Pavlovian way. When the bell rings, the dog starts salivating for the food. If we're saying, oh, I mean, I'm obviously faking it now, and I'm feeling body with this, but something like that, that's more likely for a kind man to do more of that. And
Right.
even if it's not perfect, if it's better than what was happening, you can always give your feedback next time with something that's even better.
Yeah. And if it's genuine and if it actually feels good, it really doesn't necessarily, like, your reaction and your physical and verbal feedback doesn't necessarily, like, you don't have to be doing what they're doing on a porn to achieve that. And I think when men look at porn, what they're seeing is, like you said earlier, just the other person, like, unabashedly enjoying themselves, just completely
That will
free.
inspire more pleasure. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. Such good stuff. I have one more question, and I don't, it's kind of a personal question, because it's as it relates to my life where I am right now. And it kind of also relates to, what kind of we've been conditioned to teach our daughters and our young children. So our family is very physical. We hug each other, we kiss each other on the lips, our children as well. We have 3 young kids. And so it's physical connection, physical intimacy between my husband and I is not really hidden. I mean, it's not inappropriate for our children to see. But when your 6-year-old comes up and is like, "Why are you guys hugging in the kitchen?" or "Why are you kissing?" and things like that, they're exposed to all that. And I always say what my mother used to say, which is, when you don't see us kissing, that's when you need to worry.
Yes.
So my question to you is, we have a teenage daughter and a son who's about to become a teenager, and this kind of thought process that's, I think a customary thought process, at least where I come from, that abstinence until marriage. And, you want to wait until you really love someone or you're really committed to someone, which I think are contradictory messages, because you can really love someone and not be married to them. Right. So aside from showing them a healthy model of physical connection, emotional connection, friendship, respect, what is a good way to help our children develop, our adolescents, our teens who are going to start navigating waters of feelings, physical feelings, emotional feelings? What's a good way to speak to them and explain to them, other than modeling, what physical intimacy looks like, should look like, what they can expect? It's a challenge for us, and we don't really know. One of them asked us, got into a discussion about it, and we revealed to them that we had sex before we were married. And they were like, "Oh, you did? Like, I've heard that was wrong. Like, you're not supposed to do that." And we were kind of stuck. The conversation ended up being really positive, but we were like, I don't know if that was right. I don't know if we should have said that. We're trying to learn everything that we can about how to communicate what healthy physical relationships should look like. Should they be monogamous? Should they be, because I don't know what they're going to want to do when they're adults. I don't know if they're going to want to be monogamous, if they're going to want to be, heterosexual, homosexual. I don't know what they want. And for me to tell them that they should wait to get married to be physically intimate with someone, I don't think is true. I didn't think it was true before I was married. And I don't think it's true for my children, but it's a tricky question. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
I love the question. I feel really honored that you asked it. And I have a number of thoughts on it. The first one gets at the total misconception that we should have, in quotes, the talk with our children. if we're having the talk, we failed, because this is an ongoing conversation. So my most fundamental response to you is to have it be that these conversations can happen, and you go, it's okay if you cover a little or a lot in any given conversation. The most important thing is that you're available for when the next iteration arises, because the world is different no matter, I mean, I'm 53, but it doesn't matter how old anyone is. The world is different than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. We can fully, I mean, now with the pandemic, who knows how that ends up influencing dating and things like that.
Sure.
Not in terms of biblical teachings, but in terms of what they're actually encountering. So
Yeah.
I really think the most important thing is to be available for dialogue, and for the kids to know that even when you don't agree or approve, that you're still available for a civilized, humane, open-minded conversation. Not that you don't have any of your own standards, whatever that is.
Yeah.
That, like for me, this has never happened, but all of my kids know that I would much rather they call me if they're in a situation that they're not supposed to be in, but they're unsafe,
Yeah.
whether it's drugs, alcohol, or sex. Again, it hasn't happened because we have enough openness and mind, just to give perspective. But they do know that, and I knew a family where the rule was, if you tell the same day it happened, you won't get in trouble. But if the parents find out anytime after that 24-hour window,
Mm-hmm.
they will get in trouble. So that's not quite the thing you're talking about. You're really talking about education and
Yeah.
future-oriented inspiration, but you can see how these principles would apply. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that I really think that all of the save yourself for marriage teachings don't make any sense whatsoever as rules. I mean, someone might choose to do this, but as rules, unless you expect your children to get married soon after graduating high school.
Mm-hmm.
If they're going to, or yeah, if they're going to go to college and have any kind of postgraduate education, if they have any kind of career ambitions, this just is not how this works. You can certainly teach not to do things casually, to do things intentionally. And I remember for myself getting really clear at some point, if I'm going to have sex with someone, I better be willing to potentially, even if I don't want it, potentially get pregnant with this person and navigate that. Like there's some fundamental physiological realities that can feel like a scary rule, but it's also true that there's no birth control that's 100% other than sterility. Yeah. And to, without it being scary, to also not pretend that isn't true. I guess that's like to think a little bit beyond the pleasure, not as a punishment, but just because that's the reality.
Reality, yeah.
And the other thing that I would say, again, not general rules, but it sounds like you have absolutely fabulous relationships with your children, and that means you know what's going on with their friends. And friends create fantastic opportunities for conversations about how you might handle things in your family, or how you might do things differently, or if your teenager has a friend who, like, I knew when my friends lost their virginity, and you know, to just have that be a judgment-free zone for exploring topics.
Sure.
It just creates more vocabulary.
Yeah.
That's what I would say. And I'll also say that I personally I wanted to marry someone who had lived with someone before because I wanted him to have the experience of navigating. I didn't want to have to train him on how to share a home with a woman.
Well, I think it's really relevant to today and what you were speaking about with how times are different. Relationships look different. They come in all different shapes and sizes. And sometimes the things that, older people in our families and in our lives try to impart on our kids just aren't the way things work anymore. Families, relationships, parent-child relationships, they come in all, and romantic relationships come in all different shapes and sizes. What they're seeing most is a man and a woman, who are monogamous. And like I said, that might not end up being what they want or what they, the road that they choose to explore. Or they may do a whole bunch of other exploring before they end at that. Who knows? It's just.
But I do want to add, this is my view, but since that's what you asked, that while I completely agree with what you just said, I don't feel that it's my role as the mother to introduce them to all those variations. Like, I trust that if my children are going to end up, funny because I already know they aren't in my particular children's case, but if I had a child who's going to end up as a polyamorous homosexual, he's going to find that. Or she's going to find that, I suppose. Well, anyway, I had a him in mind as I said it. He's going to find that and doesn't need me. Like, I rob my children of something if I'm the one introducing them to things, because part of the fun of becoming a sovereign, independent adult is discovering things. So I want to be available for conversation, but if I expand the boundaries of what I'm introducing them to in terms of adult themes, then I'm just pushing back how far they have to go to find something innovative and unusual, because some children need to discover most children need to make some perfectly happy with what I'm teaching being relatively narrow. But then as they discover other things, I'm totally available for conversation.
No, I think kind of what I meant was just, their own, what their typical model, what they see most, as a man and a woman in a relationship, a monogamous relationship. And so I think that the best that we can do is to be a good model of that and be non-judgmental about people who choose other things, because if my child comes to me when they're whatever age and wants to reveal that their interests are different than mine, I think it's just more reflective of what the world really is right now. And I have to be open-minded to that. And I have to be comfortable with that possibility, and that's.
Yeah, you're really making me laugh because we moved to rural area, having always lived up and down the New York Jew. And we ended up just for 2 years in this rural evangelical area where most people had never met a Jew. It was very conservative. And it's why I know well the purity movement and all of that and everything. So I had been invited to a friend's wedding. It was 2 women who got married in Miami on the beach. And I was planning to go myself. But after we moved to this very conservative, biblically oriented community, we were there for 4 months. I took my 15-year-old daughter with me. And I didn't discuss anything. And it wasn't at all that I was pushing her in any particular direction. But because of what she was exposed to and her being a teenager at the time, I needed her to know that good people do not follow those rules.
Or that just like that's a normal thing. Like going to a gay wedding is just there's no reason to even talk about it. Like, we're going to a gay wedding, there's no reason to even call it that. We're going to the celebration of marriage between these 2 people.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's a beautiful gift that I think you gave to your daughter. And just, I think just to kind of sum up how grateful I am to you for, being willing to talk about these things, being comfortable and open enough to talk about these things, I hope inspires other people to do the same, whether it's with their partner or with a therapist or a counselor, or whether it's with their children. I think it's just a beautiful gift that you give to yourself and that you have given to us to know that you can have the courage and self-confidence to explore your body, your emotions, your intimacy, whether it's physical or emotional. And I'm just so grateful that you are here to talk about this. I think we could do a whole podcast in and of itself with all of my questions, but I know that you have your own podcast and you have your own website. So before we go, I would love for you to tell my friends who are listening where we can find you and connect with you online and on social media.
I will too, but I just have to tell you, I've never had this thought before. I mean, I've been interviewed at least 100 times and I've never had this thought, but I think collaborating on a podcast or like a podcast series of like 6 or something with you would be so fun. I just completely adore everything that you have said today. It's really fantastic. So yeah,
thank you.
Podcast.
I love that you got your voice is so hoarse from the wedding last night that you actually sound like a telephone sex operator today for this podcast interview. It makes me so happy.
Yes. So my podcast is called The Marriage Podcast with Alexandra Stockwell. And we mostly don't actually talk about sex, but sometimes, and it's just more of like my philosophy on relationships, I think is a way to put it. So more of conversations like this. And my website is alexandrastockwell.com. And I have a lot of different offerings available, a short course on desires. My book is called Uncompromising, and you'll find lots of things there.
Can you repeat that part? Because you broke up. Tell me, you said my book is called.
Oh yeah. My book is called Uncompromising Intimacy. And I really spell out how to create emotional intimacy. And so if you go to my website, alexandrastockwell.com, you'll find a lot of different options.
Well, as I finish my white wine, I'm going to go take my bombshell, you know where. And I just want to say thank you for being who you are, for doing what you do, for being so open, honest, present, and for helping people live the juiciest possible life that they can. You're a true, true gem. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. That is beautiful.
Bye, Dr. Stockwell.
Bye-bye.
Hey, thanks for listening to my podcast, Family Health with Dr. Lex. If you love the music like I do, you can find more at therealmichaelvm.com/music. If you'd like to support the show, please leave a review, subscribe, and share with your friends. You can ask questions, suggest topics for future podcast interviews, and find more health and wellness information on my website, drlexlifestylemedicine.com. See you next time. Bye.